Few ships have donated more tons of flour to Lake Huron than the propeller Albany, built for Western Transit at Wyandotte in 1884. Its first cargo was grain, and 3 years later, Captain Frank Williams was bringing flour through the Straits of Mackinac when he was caught in a blinding snowstorm. The Albany smashed onto Poe Reef at full speed, and despite 500 barrels of flour being tossed into the lake, the steamer wouldn't budge. Terms were discussed to bring in extra help and lighters to take the flour cargo, and the tug Major Dana tied up to the port side of the Albany to offload her. The barges took the cargo ashore, where over 200 barrels of flour and 21 40-gallon containers of lard were stolen. The entire cargo of the second barge also turned up missing, and the U.S. Marshals were called in. 500 barrels were found hidden in the woods. Captain Angus McDonald took command of the Albany in the fall of 1888. That next season, he nearly lost the ship on Lake Michigan, turning around at Little Point Sable when a wave washed away his forward cabin. The crew reinforced the floor of the wheelhouse and made an 11-hour trip back to Chicago.
In 1893, Captain McDonald was making that same run to Buffalo when he encountered blinding fog off Michigan's Thumb. At 2 a.m., the Philadelphia slammed into the Albany, and the 24 members of the crew jumped into their lifeboats and rowed to the Philadelphia.
Captain McDonald believed his ship could be saved, so he asked Captain Huff to take his ship in tow. The two ships made only 30 minutes toward shore when the Albany started sinking. 230 barrels of flour and 75,000 bushels of oats went down with her. A half hour more and it was evident the Philadelphia wasn't going to make it. Now, with only 2 lifeboats and enough life belts for half the men, the crew were being lowered to the water. With the lifeboats filled, the captain and chief engineer's dogs had to be left on board.
Captain Huff lost more than just his dog when the Philadelphia went down. His chief engineer, Colin Leggett, had also lost a dog, and he and second mate Albert Hanna boarded the second lifeboat with the majority of the Albany's crew. And while they managed to lower the boat and get to the waterline, after a few shouts of encouragement from the captains in the other boat, they vanished into the fog. No one lived on lifeboat number 2, which was likely hit by either the Philadelphia, which had been left under power in hopes that it would make shallow water for an easier salvage, or they were hit by an unreported other vessel in the fog. But either way, many of the bodies that were recovered and brought here to Tawas had severe injuries to their heads, arms, and legs. Hanna was found wearing his pin from the Lake Pilots Aid Association, and inside his memo book he had $80 cash. Sadly, he was single, and all they knew was he was from Buffalo, and no one claimed his body. After a year, he was buried right here in Greenwood Cemetery. Another body had a scar on his hand, and it was believed he was a watchman named Williams. Tawas's coroner sent him to Saginaw, where Mrs. C.M. Williams was preparing a funeral. Williams was actually alive. He had left the Philadelphia and shipped out of Bay City on board the steam barge James Donaldson. He was in Ontonagon loading when the collision occurred and knew nothing until he returned home. The unidentified body was sent back here to Tawas.
Government inspectors looked into the collision and found no fault, largely due to the fact that no one steering or commanding the Philadelphia was alive to tell what happened. Captain Huff had been in his cabin until he felt the ship go into reverse to avoid the crash and was not held liable. Captain McDonald moved on to the steamer Hudson. He was lost in a gale on Lake Superior in 1901. Tragedy found Captain Huff 4 years later after he took a land-based job at the dock in Lackawanna, New York. Working on the deck of the steamer Luzon at 3:30 in the morning, he accidentally stepped into an open hatch, falling 20 feet into the hold. 43 years old, he had only been with the steel company for a year. Today, divers visit both wrecks in the Thumb Area Underwater Preserve. Nearly 3 miles apart, Philadelphia is largely intact, with its cargo of cook stoves still on the deck. The Albany is twisted into pieces, and rumors persist that barrels of flour were still being discovered in Lake Huron into the 1940s. Learn more about incredible survivals of dogs on the Great Lakes in my new book, Howling Winds, available at your favorite maritime museum or online at shipwreckpodcast.com.